And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Purandar Das, who is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Sotero. Purandar, thanks very much for joining us.
David, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So you are no stranger to data security. You come with a tremendous background of being on the other side of the fence. Maybe walk us through that just so we can get a feel of what you've done so far.
Yeah, sure. As you pointed out, my background is actually on the data management side. I work with some of the largest marketing services providers in the world. And I was tasked with not just the data acquisition and data management, but also keeping the data secure at scale. We're talking about thousands of clients with billions of records that contain sensitive information. Part of the journey to get to this point was the challenges associated with trying to keep data secure, but still make it accessible and actionable. Security typically has often implied that data or access to data be limited or constrained. By nature, that implies that you lose a lot of functionality or the ability to actually operate and use data. So our approach is to keep data secure, but eliminate any of the barriers associated with keeping data secure.
And, there's always this age-long, I guess, dichotomy between usability and security. It seems like it's always been like that, right? So it's either it's highly secure, it's very inaccessible, and vice versa. But let's jump into kind of the current environment of data, like where things are going. We've seen like an explosion of data in the world in general, right? I mean, we're generating I've heard somewhere that the number of terabytes we generate per second is astounding, right? Where is this going, like from an enterprise perspective with your customers that you're working with on a daily basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think you mentioned the key word there, right? Explosion of data. But I mean, in all in a very positive way, right? I mean, organizations are utilizing data to provide extremely beneficial and effective services or capabilities to consumers. But that in itself creates an environment where data is being collected in magnitudes that were not even imaginable even a decade ago. But the drive for that is essentially the evolution of technology, the ability to collect data, the ability to act on data, and the ability to build platforms that enable millions, if not hundreds of millions of users and consumers to operate on a single platform. That technology didn't exist. It does exist now, and organizations are leveraging that fact to build, whether it's a community or a service or a product that enables interactivity between consumers at a scale that you didn't think of. I honestly don't think that that's going to change. The collection and the building of services or products that include the possibility of creating millions, if not billions, of data points every minute. Right, that's good. But the challenge with that is how do you collect the data, keep it secure, but still be able to operate on it, but not imposing any barriers to that data that you're collecting.
And you mentioned data in regards to marketing. You mentioned data in regards to like operations and so on. And when we think data, there's data classification, right? So not every data is the same, right, across the board. There are the kind of the PII data, but there's also data just that, stems from the fact that we interact with the company, right? It can be just somebody logging into the website or even surfing the website of the company, and then that company collects that information. All that data is stored somewhere, right? And from what you've seen in a regulatory environment, it seems like there's a push towards managing that data and creating regulations around it. Who can collect what? We've seen like GDPR and some other regulatory environments. What's your take on that? Like, where is regulation going from a data perspective?
I mean, to start off, regulations are behind the curve or behind the proverbial 8 ball, right? Organizations are almost always faster in terms of evolving and building products or services that they can monetize that are beneficial to consumers. Regulatory frameworks are still typically pretty far behind, if you will, because they started off with focusing, as you said, on the financial services space and to some extent on marketing services. But overall, whether it's financial services or marketing capabilities, it doesn't really matter what organization or what process the data is being consumed by. The fact that it's sensitive data and leads back to an individual, their behavior, their location, does imply that it's sensitive, right? You don't want the data to be abused or fall into the wrong hands. I think regulations where they're pushing today, especially from a European perspective, has been around trying to make sure that the privacy of individuals is preserved, right? I mean, many organizations, right? I mean, Facebook keeps coming up to the top of the heap in almost all conversations because they were one of the more successful platforms in engaging consumers across the globe. Meaning that they were collecting sensitive information from consumers like many other businesses. And in collecting it, aggregating it, operating on it outside of the geography that it was collected in, that leads to a primary disconnect. When you talk about privacy regulations, you're talking about privacy regulations from a different geography or a different country being applied to data that's not even being stored, even though it was collected from individuals in that geography. I think that notion of enabling consumers to interact with a service or a business, but still be confident that their privacy was being ensured, I think is leading to a lot of regulatory pressure across the globe.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And then the disjointed systems, it seems like there's explosion of data and almost every system out there creates that data. But then there's an explosion of how many types of data and how many systems are out there. And that, creates a struggle for a lot of organizations. How do you protect a massive amount of data that is not in a central location? It's everywhere. Yep. And it's spat out by these systems. So again, from your perspective, where do you see, like when you talk to customers and prospective customers, what are kind of the top, 2 or 3 things that come to mind when they come to you and say, Purandar, I don't know where my data is, but I need to protect it?
Yeah. So the top 2 or 3 concerns that we help address or we constantly hear are the following, right? To your point, it's regulatory pressure or even the awareness that they're collecting huge amounts of sensitive data is leading them to acknowledge that data is just beyond that one operational platform or system that they've always thought about, which could be the billing thing or the website. But that data travels through the organization in many different forms in many different ways. That's one. They're saying it's beyond what we thought it was, and it's the environment itself is much more complex. It's not just one single system. It's actually a combination of many different technologies, many different frameworks that we collect and store data in. Is there a solution to protecting and securing data in all of its forms, wherever we use it? Because data in one format is not typically sufficient for an organization to operate on, right? A billing system uses a different kind of a data storage platform. An analytic one uses a different one. A modeling one uses a third thing. When you adopt a cloud platform or a cloud service, you're looking at yet another thing. So this leads to a lot of point solutions, if at all. And that's not sustainable. Security organizations are not being built or staffed to manage security or privacy across many different data storage platforms, right? They're looking for products that can help span that range of data storage platforms that they use without a lot of difficulty or lift on their side. What they also want on top of that is the ability to support data both on-premise, in the cloud, or even a third-party platform. They're saying we can't afford to count on a third-party platform or a service provider to say they'll keep our data secure. We need to be in control of it. Can you help us? Is there one product that helps identify the sensitive attributes in all of our data sets and be able to protect it regardless of what system we have today or what system we want to use in the future?
And Purandar, like I hear you speak, and I have so many questions, trying to keep them in order. So there's this. What you mentioned, that they don't trust their service providers. There's this whole shared responsibility model where, for example, if you store it on a cloud provider, they're not necessarily responsible for that particular aspect of it. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I mean, they will tell you that they have the security frameworks in place, and they do. But the thing to keep in mind is the cloud service provider is not the one collecting data from your consumer, you as an organization, and they're not the one making a commitment to keep your consumer's data secure. They will give you the basic tools, right? Saying if you did all this, your data is secure to some extent. But they're not taking ownership of data security for you. You as the organization that collected and committing to keeping your data, your consumers' data private or secure, should be the one owning security. That framework doesn't exist in the cloud service providers' architecture today. We want to be the company, we want to be the product that enables an organization to be in control of the data, regardless of where it's moved or where it's being stored.
Yeah, and we'll talk a bit about kind of the state of affairs right now. But before we jump into that, let's touch upon a couple other trends. One is this whole IoT explosion, and using of streaming services. Again, this is coming back to the original explosion, statement out there. What have you seen the companies from an IoT perspective, and what's the need there to protect some of the digital assets and the data that's been transferred?
Oh, absolutely, right. I mean, IoT in not from a scary perspective, but from a pragmatic perspective, right? IoT devices expose sensitive information that was not even conceivable before they actually think. And if you think about a simple thing as a thermostat or a sprinkler controller, they're able to tell, if you actually analyze the data on them that they're collecting, they're able to tell somebody that's looking at it when people are at home and when they're not, and what they do, their behavioral patterns, right? They're extremely sensitive if they fell into the wrong hands. It's like being able to access data on your mobile phone, your location, the things that you use, where you've been to. Those are all extremely sensitive. You do that unconsciously, assuming that whatever you do, right, has to be private, and it should be. There's no reason for people to be tracking you as to where you've gone and what you did and why you did it. That's nobody's business. IoT devices are good at collecting data, but the framework to keep the data secure requires that same thing that we discussed earlier, right? The ability to access and analyze data with confidence, right? The providers, the service providers need to be able to access the data to give you the best service possible and the best recommendations. That in itself also requires that only the right people get access to it and the wrong people be kept away from the data, right? So that's the challenge with IoT devices. They're collecting data at a much more granular level and of actions and behaviors that were not even feasible a few years ago.
So and it's almost like it's almost like a blind spot as well, because like as you mentioned, people like would install an IoT device but not necessarily think that it's something that spits out that information. And I remember, as you mentioned, like, for example, a Nest thermometer, a thermostat, I mean, the amount of data it collects is staggering. It's like in the gigs, right? It's like unbelievable amount of data over a period of a month. And they give you these fancy reports and so on. But enterprise level also has that concern, right?
There's absolutely, right. And there's actually a second challenge that's also inherent in the same thing. To your point about them collecting that much data, if you think about that and scale that up by tens of millions of consumers that are pushing data into a centralized platform, that whole challenge of managing that volume of data back into a central repository, being able to act on it and then push the learnings back to the end devices is pretty challenging, and it keeps getting worse because of the volume of data. Now you're talking about data being kept at the edge or on the device and being operated securely on the device. That actually magnifies the security and privacy problem even further. You're now talking about collecting data at a device that's much, much smaller than anything that consumers or organizations have worked with, right? Keeping the data locally, keeping it secure, but being able to let the operator access, analyze it, and make the recommendations without the risk that anybody that's not authorized to look at the data can get access to it.
Yeah, and this brings to the point where we talked about kind of the state of affairs in terms of data, data evolution, right? If you can call it that. On the other hand, let's talk a bit about kind of the status quo of how companies protecting the data today, and where are the gaps. So, looking back, there are various data loss prevention solutions out there. There's encryption, but why don't we start with those? Like, what's going on with the current state of affairs? And you obviously talking to a lot of companies and customers. They have legacy systems. So, what is kind of the status quo, and where are the gaps that you see on a day-to-day basis?
Great question, David. I mean, you take encryption as an example, right? Data security built on encryption was focused on keeping data protected while it was at rest, right? That was fundamentally the goal, meaning that you wanted to prevent somebody from being able to copy the file from disk, right? Or being able to steal your disk. Encryption products today are great at doing that, right? The data is encrypted. If somebody walked into a data center and tried to make a copy of the disk or walked away with your disk, you were secure. But the problem is data is not stolen that way. Data is actually stolen through a valid, privileged interface or access point. Meaning,
and Purandar, I think, not to cut you up, but I think reason why it's not stolen that way, because it's so difficult. You just can't walk into the data center. It's behind bunkers, basically, like this whole like high walls and so on. So you can't do it. But the other way around, when you just mentioned it, in motion, where somebody also already authenticated, that is where you kind of the magic or the shit hits the fan, sort of speak to speak, when people are siphoning that data out. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, right. I mean, so there's actually a second challenge with encryption today, right? So encrypted data at rest doesn't let you access and use it. So you've lost functionality, or you've lost the ability to use data if it's encrypted, meaning data is secure from somebody physically stealing it, but worse, the privileged user or the user with the actual rights to use it can't access it if it stays encrypted. So for data to be used, you have to decrypt it and stage it in plain text, meaning there's no protection from the legacy encryption products. The challenge and the opportunity there is to build and provide a framework that keeps data encrypted while it's being used, but also monitor usage and access and make sure it's the privileged users alone that get access to using the data. And for those users, once you establish their credentials, you make sure that there are no barriers for them to use the data. That is the challenge, and that's the opportunity.
So you're talking about the role-based access control, where depending who is accessing, get that privileged access to data, and then management of all of that. As you mentioned, Purandar, where it's easy on limited number of users, but it's exponentially difficulty from that perspective once you start scaling, right?
Absolutely. There's two challenges. One is that one is if you have a small set of users, it's easier, I would say, to implement role-based access control and manage it. The second challenge associated with that, David, is that role-based access control is based on constraints or known rules, right? Every breach that you hear of is a different one that you didn't know about, right? So you're with an RBAC or a role-based constraint, you're limited to knowing what somebody is going to do. It's almost always what you didn't know that they could do that causes a problem. So role-based access control is effective up to a certain point, both from a scale as well as complexity. But I think it's the evolution towards using automated or machine learning approaches to provide a true scalable solution. Mm-hmm. And I think kind of the simplest way to put it is you focus on what people should be doing and limit whatever they shouldn't be doing, or whatever you think or that they shouldn't be doing. And that's something that can grow with time with the machine learning model, right? You will get, and people complain about a lot of false positives, but false positives are better than losing your data.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is part of the overall movement towards data-centric security as opposed to data center security, as you mentioned. Yep. The ability to control the data wherever it is, whether it's traveling or at rest and so on. So And then there's also this whole notion of zero trust, right? And applying the zero trust associated with it. So how does zero trust, how do you apply data-centric security to zero trust? And how does Sotero help with that?
Well, very simple way, right? I mean, just somebody said this to me, and I think it resonated very well with me. They said the perimeter is broken, data is the new perimeter. Mm-hmm. In that context, it makes total sense, right? Everything that around security that's been done has been done at the network or the access level. Data has been ignored for the most part because of the constraints of trying to secure data because it makes it unusable. From our perspective, zero trust is taking that whole model and applying it at the data access level or at the data level. What Sotero does is it encrypts data, keeps data encrypted while it's being used. So there's no exposure while data is being used. On top of that, you put in a machine learning model that evaluates every request in real time and identifies any anomalies in that request. If you think about it, all of these have been done, but at the network level, at the access level. Our technology allows us to kind of condense this down to the data level, right? And be able to spot malicious patterns, whether it's related to malware, ransomware, attempts to breach, or the stolen credentials. We are able to identify all of that, but through our machine learning anomaly detection engine. But we also keep the data encrypted in the event somebody unauthorized gets to the data around our implementation.
And encryption inherently is tough, right? This is why, as you mentioned, that most organizations they gave up on it or just only did it at rest and not in motion. How do you handle that, Sotero? How do you handle the kind of the key management aspect of it? Because it's the complexity is definitely there.
So it's complex, and it suffers a bad reputation for a couple of reasons. One is all of the peripheral things, and one of them, the key things you said about key management, right? Key management has not been a part of encryption. It requires a secondary framework, skills and talent and challenges, all that. And encryption itself has struggled because of two things. One is the inability to use it, and performance. What we bring to the table is real-time performance that puts minimal latency, if anything at all, on the operational aspects of it. Normally, we're within 1% to 2% of any unencrypted data performance. So we make that irrelevant to the overall performance metrics for the deployment. We take away the challenges associated with the encryption because we actually include and bundle encryption with our product. It's seamless, transparent, more granular than what you would get with your own key management framework. And we do all of the management underneath the covers. We're requiring no implementation or no skills. That's what we've done.
Yeah, and it's amazing because that would remove the need of yet another solution to do key management, which is, again, it's not trivial. It's expensive. It's costly. It has a lot of drawbacks as well. So talk to me about if organization already has some encryption solutions or whatnot, what's that process look like? And how do you evaluate, like, the first, let's say you meet with someone and they say, well, we know we have a problem. We'd like you to fix it. What's that process look like for you?
So typically when we talk, that's one of it. Actually, you bring up a really good point, right? I mean, organizations have struggled with encryption and their data protection. Right now, most of them, if not many of them, are evaluating what their enterprise data security looks like. So for us, they put on the table an enterprise-wide challenge saying we want to establish a single product for all data security within the organization, or governance and risk management. What we tell them is, hey, listen, that could be a 2 to 3 year project for an enterprise your size. Right? It's too complex, too challenging, not for the product, not for us, but for your own resources. What we tell them is pick your most critical use case, one that's impacting you from a business perspective and limiting your ability to either operate or generate revenue.
Are these typically, Purandar, are these typically like the crown jewels that, if you've seen that in your perspective, or these or a business, I'm assuming business-related applications, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could be something really tactical, right? I mean, we are working with organizations that say our product development is challenged today because we can't move production data into downstream systems to drive product development and testing. And because of that, every release either has very limited features or has a lot of bugs in it because we can't have real world data to test it.
And then Purandar, that's impacts the bottom line. If you can't be competitive, so that is where makes executive wake up at night. And it's not so much the encryption piece; it's the fact that they're not competitive.
Exactly. So we tell them we will eliminate the challenge for you by enabling you to move your entire production data set into QA and testing to begin with, to help you accelerate your product development process or your feature development, right? And you have no risk because the data is encrypted. But on the other hand, it doesn't limit you from looking at all of the data to run your entire suite of use cases. So that's one. So the other thing is they'll say we have access to a new analytic product or capability in the cloud. We can move our data because it's sensitive. We tell them, use Sotero to move your production critical data into a third-party platform for analytics, for example. You can confidently sleep at night because nobody will look at your data. Even if they did, they wouldn't see anything because it stays encrypted.
And amazing. That's an amazing point, because now you can finally get to where you want it to go, which is the analytics piece of it, with all the data that it requires that needs to be processed. And again, it's this revenue generation. So you're working on the kind of innards of business problems that are eventually, impact the bottom line.
David, great point. People tell me, oh, you have a great security product. And we go, no, we have a security framework that enables you to achieve business goals. This is all about business outcomes, eliminating barriers, eliminating challenges, because you're not confident that your data will stay secure when it moves outside of your control. That's what we provide.
Yeah, amazing. And, it's funny because we mentioned it, kind of the prequel, is that data is a new oil. And you basically just allow companies to drill through that a little quicker and in a more efficient way, and remove the bottlenecks. I think that there's a lot of bottlenecks that are associated with data mining, data review across the board of the enterprise, right? This is not, for a particular area.
So David, to that point, right, organizations keep talking about how they want to be a multi-cloud organization because they don't want to be stuck with one. There are services in a second cloud or a third cloud services provider that are not available here. It's always good to think. The biggest challenge, honestly, is security and privacy from their mind. Right? If they spent all this effort and money into making a system or their environment secure in one cloud, that doesn't translate into the same framework in a second cloud. What do? We eliminate that thing by saying Sotero is a product that enables you to spread across a multi-cloud environment, do whatever you want to do in any kind of a data platform. Security and privacy are not a concern. Right? You don't require new skills. You don't require new training. It's just a product, a service that enables you to adopt any platform in any cloud.
And let's talk a bit about just current affairs. Since COVID had the increase exponentially in ransomware attacks and so on, right?
Yep.
In essentially ransomware, it's all about getting to your data and then preventing you to access the data, and then as well as publishing the data. And you help in that, right? So how do you solve that issue?
So our opinion and my perspective is ransomware is two things. One is they hold you ransom by making your systems inoperable, right? Encrypt your application stack, make sure your applications don't come up, and then say, give me money to unencrypt that and get you thing. The second piece of what they do is steal your data. Make a copy of your data, exfiltrate your data, and then hold you ransom for your data. So even if you had a great backup and recovery restore system, right? If your data is stolen and it's in the hands of a third party and it contains sensitive information, you're still in trouble even if you're able to restore the thing. That's where we come in, right? We help make sure that even if a third party or a hacker steals your data, that they can't really do anything with it because the data is encrypted, right? We don't decrypt the data for use. There's no point at which the data stays in plain text. So even if they stole a copy of your data, the data would be useless for them. That's where we come in with the ultimate backstop or protection for organizations from a ransomware perspective.
And yes, and this is very timely. It seems like there's just the occurrence is at least in the U.S. it's like every few minutes you can there's a company get hit. Now, how do you calculate the ROI on it? Typically, executive wants to know, like, how quickly can we see the benefits from this solution, and what else can we do with it? So, meaning that yes, okay, now we created our go to from development to production. I'm assuming they start to see more and more application after they install Sotero and see, okay, where else can we install this in the organization? And maybe talk to me about what that looks like,
Absolutely. So, I mean, this many organizations talk about this as a sales strategy, right? The land and expand. For us, that has just happened as a natural progression. We go in there and help them with one use case. The thing is move production data into downstream systems, whether it's for analytics or for QA and development, product development and testing. What we do right there is one thing, help them with their bottom line, right? By creating more features, accelerating the product development process with confidence, and eliminating the tedious process of working through bugs and stuff. On the timeline itself, we've been able to reduce tasks that have taken organizations a month to move production quality data, obfuscate it, and move a subset of it to minutes or hours. So there's both aspects of it, right? There's the time, accelerating the time to market, and also eliminating the lag in putting new features and capabilities that drive top-line revenue. Every one of our customers, after they've seen the product in action in one use case, actually, like you said, come back to us and say, we have many other use cases, right? With other complex data storage platforms, can you support them? And our answer is, we don't need to do anything. The product you have deployed already does it, right? It already has the support for all of your data stores in your environment. And that's helped us expand our opportunities within our customers.
And I'm assuming they can start sunsetting some of the maybe traditional solutions they've had if they had it, so over time. And so what does the initial, let's say they wanted to do a proof of concept, a proof of value, what does that look like, from your perspective, and how involved is that process, if at all?
So, for the typical proof of value for us is about 2 days. Right. What we tell them is, instead of worrying about getting all of the things in place, resources, systems, platforms in your environment, just take a sample data set and try us out in the cloud. We have a SaaS platform that stands up as a service, a managed service in the cloud, and it'll take you about a day or two to set your system up and test it. And they're just amazed by how quickly the process happens.
So can they test it out with their own data? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay, Absolutely. Because that's powerful. Most companies like to see their own data.
Absolutely. So, it almost sounds like I had you ask this question. So we're about to actually launch free trials on our platform in 2 different scenarios. One is use your own data, right? Connect it to your system. We don't store any of your data in the system. We're just a pass-through, right? We'll do the encryption, the decryption, and the brokering, and all of the management, and you don't have to worry about anything. The second scenario we're also setting up free trials for is, if you're a business user that can't or doesn't want to get your hands on data, we actually set up data sets, right, with dashboards to help them to visualize the value that we bring to their process.
And Purandar, you did a great job, because this interview was completely unscripted. So whatever I tackle you with, you had it all lined up. So what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you, to reach out to the company if they wanted to give it a shot, and maybe talk to you a little bit more about the applications for Sotero?
The easiest way is to go to our website, www.soterosoft.com. We have, there's plenty of opportunities there to ask for additional information, ask for a meeting, ask for a demo. We're happy to do all that. The free trial link is going to go live in the next day on our website, so you can actually test it out without even talking to any of us. But we'll be there to help you through the process. I am on LinkedIn, Purandar Das, on LinkedIn. Love to talk to people that have questions or want additional information.
And I'm sure as a CEO, and you probably have big plans for Sotero, and maybe some development, like in terms of roadmaps. But we can discuss this some other time. But I'm looking forward to keeping track of Sotero, and I highly recommend for people to take a look at it. Data is a big problem, and data encryption has always been a big problem. And finally, there's a solution out there that looks at practical and pragmatic ways to solve it, data in motion, and help with that process across the board, across the organizational function. So, Purandar, thank you very much for joining. Much appreciate, and looking forward to hosting you sometimes in the near future.
David, thank you for your time. Pleasure. Love to be back on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, everyone who watched, thanks very much for joining. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Take care and stay safe, online and offline.
Thanks.